Hi, my name is Bill McCamley, and welcome to What the Bleep Does This Mean, a podcast where we talk about something fairly complicated going on in public life and try to explain it in words you can understand in 15 minutes or less. And today we're going to talk about the topic of the hour, which is tariffs. Last week and continuing now, the major news was Donald Trump making the decision to put tariffs on almost every country around the world. This caused the stock market to collapse and convinced some companies to immediately lay off workers. So, what the hell are these things? And if they've already caused some bad things to go on, why is Trump doing this? Well, let's take a look. To start with, a tariff is a tax, and taxes are tools, not good or bad, but useful or harmful depending on what they're used for. A hammer is great for nailing things together, but pretty shitty if you try to fix your iPhone with it. Taxes are funds that we use to pay for services we like. Here in the US, national taxes pay for the Army, Medicare, national highways, that sort of thing. And two-thirds of these are actually income taxes, both the personal ones you pay every year and taxes on corporations. And while everyone hates taxes, people generally feel good about the stuff they get from them. A tariff is another form of sales tax. It is collected by the government from American companies who import things from another country and generally affects two types of stuff, right? First, direct things a company sells you. Think coffee from Colombia or Ethiopia, t-shirts from Bangladesh or Vietnam, or PlayStations from China. For other things that are assembled here, some or all of the parts might come from a foreign country. Take a Ford F-150. The best-selling vehicle in the United States for 43 years. It's assembled in Michigan and Missouri, but a ton of the parts in the truck comes from somewhere else. The door hinges and arms come from Canada, mufflers from Colombia, and the engines are made in Ciudad Chihuahua in Mexico. So when the US government taxes these, the company, in that case Ford, because they have to make a profit, generally increases the price you pay for it, which is what it means when they say the costs get passed on to you. So why does a government do a tariff? Well, it's one way for the government to bring in money to fund programs, but the main reason is about one word, and that is protectionism. See, if someone is making something here and faces competition for whatever they're selling from somewhere else in another country, they might pressure their government to raise prices through tariffs on the thing from abroad to make the one here cheaper by comparison. Take sugar. In the 1980s, President Reagan wanted to outspend the Russians to end the Cold War, so wanted a ton of money to build more weapons. But he was a Republican, and Democrats controlled Congress. They wrote the budget and weren't really excited about this, so Reagan starts cutting deals. And one of them was with a Louisiana senator named John Breaux. Louisiana grows a ton of sugar, but faces competition from other countries with cheaper workforces, making it cheaper to grow. So, to get Breaux's vote for his big military budgets, Reagan raised the sugar tariffs in 1983, making the sugar from Louisiana more affordable in comparison to sugar coming in from other places. When Breaux was actually asked about this and about whether his vote could be bought, he had a famous quote that said, "No, but it is available for rent." So that's a basic trade-off about these tariff taxes. You can theoretically protect jobs in the country the tariffs come from and raise a little revenue, but these taxes raise prices, even for things that you produce locally, because those folks have to buy coffee as well, and that's going to cost more. Another issue is that if a country raises tariffs, the general response from a country you trade with is that they raise their own tariffs on your stuff in retaliation. So prices go up everywhere on everything, and that is what makes what we call a trade war. US tariffs have gone up and down depending on political opinions. In the 1890s, a congressman named William McKinley, who later became president, raised tariffs, which was intended to protect American jobs. But in the end, prices went up like crazy, and it caused a huge recession called the Panic of 1893. Another big tariff was the Hawley-Smoot tariffs in the early 1930s. Remember, during that time, you had this Great Depression where a lot of people were out of work and it was really, really poor. So tariffs became popular because they thought, hey, it might protect the jobs here and grow some stuff. And President Herbert Hoover put them in to encourage job growth, even though 1,000 economists warned that higher prices would screw up the economy even more. And if you've ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off and the famous clip of his high school teacher talking in a really boring tone about these tariffs, you know what happens next. The economists were right. They caused what has been described as the mother of all trade wars, and it's seen by most historians as making the Great Depression much worse because rising prices combined with less jobs in the US because other countries stopped buying our stuff. Then World War II came and things changed again. So most industrialized countries around the world suffered greatly after the war because their factories were bombed out, their farm fields were ripped up by tanks, and a bunch of dudes that normally would have been working were killed, and none of this is good for the economy. But the US didn't have any war here, so our fields and factories kept going, and stuff made in the US, food and cotton grown here, manufactured stuff that we made, became popular, and we sold a ton of it around the world. By 1970, though, our people were super wealthy and wanted to buy a lot more stuff. At the same time, other places were rebuilt after the war and had workers that were willing to work for a whole lot cheaper than people in the US expected to get paid. So that's when we started importing stuff from other countries more than we exported our own stuff, and that is called a trade deficit. This became more of a thing after the Cold War with the USSR and Eastern Bloc ended. See, in the 1990s, there was this kind of euphoria. The Berlin Wall was falling. The internet had just started up, so everyone was talking to each other. The Dream Team made basketball a world sport. There was a German band called the Scorpions that had a song called Winds of Change about a world order based less on everybody pointing guns at one another and more about working together. But along with this came a real focus on free trade, meaning countries made agreements with each other, lowering or getting rid of these tariffs, allowing stuff to be bought and sold with minimal interference or cost. The biggest examples of this both started in 1993. You had the European Union, where every country in Europe now basically doesn't have a border with each other, and NAFTA, where tariffs were lowered between Canada, Mexico, and us here in the US. What happened depends on who you talk to. So from 1993 to 2020, when COVID hit, the gross domestic product, which is a number we use to describe how big an economy is, grew 53% in the US, 33% in Canada, and 20% in Mexico. So overall, people made more money and more people had jobs. The unemployment rate went down, and prices on things like groceries and gas did drop for people filling up or going to the grocery store. But that does not mean it went well for everybody. Free trade is generally good for the US, but is specifically bad for people in jobs in places where they move to other regions of the world because of cheaper labor. The biggest example is manufacturing. There's a region of the country called the Rust Belt. I think Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. It used to be called the Steel Belt, and it was known for making stuff. A lot of cars, but also refrigerators, washing machines, and stuff like that. A lot of those industries started losing jobs in the 70s for a ton of reasons. A huge energy crisis made gas efficient cars from Japan much more popular than the big gas guzzlers we had here. Really high inflation, which we all know about now, made it tough to buy big things like washing machines and air conditioners. And China made a huge change in 1978, opening up its economy, and its massive population of workers was willing to work cheap, which led to a ton of manufacturers going there. And NAFTA was not good for those industries and regions of the country where they were popular. A lot of the trends began from manufacturing in the 70s and 80s, but free trade policies and globalization led more companies in these specific regions, think Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, et cetera, to move to places like Chihuahua in Mexico, where those F-150 engines are built. And they closed others in small towns across these states. And there were many rural white guys who probably had the same type of jobs their old man and their grandfathers had. They lost their livelihoods, which many argue led to things like suicide, drug addiction, and a turn in political affiliation to people like Trump and J.D. Vance, which is where we find ourselves today. See, Trump has this fascination with tariffs and has been documented about it since the 1980s when he and others thought Japan was going to take over the economic world. Mark Fisher, a guy who wrote a book on Trump, has quoted, he said, he believed from the beginning that there's really nothing worse than being laughed at. And he came to see the Japanese as laughing at the US and taking advantage of us and stealing our jobs by dumping products here. And when the Japanese economy started to decline, he moved that anger to China and has been an anti-trade guy since, believing in a world where America needed to move away from a role of a world leader to a place where we just need to be by ourselves. Things have changed though since the 80s. First, because of all that NAFTA stuff, economies have become really connected, and separating them will take years, if not longer. See that example again of the F-150s with the parts from all over. Also, many of these jobs that in the past may have come back to the United States are now automated. Since the 1950s, 32 whole job categories have been lost in the United States to automation. Think things like telephone switchboard operators, elevator operators, or manufacturing jobs replaced by robots. And up to 70% of manufacturing jobs could be performed by a robot moving forward, which would probably happen if companies had to move back here from places where people work cheap. But this isn't all about jobs. This is also all about taxes. The move for tariffs hooks another thing being pushed by right-wing economics people for a long time, which is getting rid of the U.S. income tax. The U.S. income tax was first made in here in the 1913, and before that, the U.S. government didn't tax very much, but also did very little. A lot of the popular things we have today, think Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, cancer research, public highways, and food inspection, either didn't start or didn't expand until the government had the money to do it after they put it in income tax. With the income tax, you can do a couple of things. First, raise the money for this stuff. And second, it's one of the only ways to create a balanced tax system. See, a sales tax, like many of you all might have in your states, or like a tariff is where the government raises money by charging a little bit on everything you buy, but it is inherently regressive. That means the richer you are, the less likely it is that buying the stuff really hurts you. But the poorer you are, the more that percentage on your car, clothes, or school supplies eats into your budget. Think about it. If Elon buys a washing machine, the tax doesn't really matter to him. But someone making minimum wage here in New Mexico gets about $24,000 a year. So that tax, that actually something you need for clean clothes, that tax on that washing machine really bites into your budget. An income tax can be progressive, meaning the more you make, the more you pay. It is one of the only ways that a country can help, at least a little, redistribute wealth from people at the very, very top to those who might be lower level workers and need a little help to make it. And those people that make a ton of money in a capitalist system, they'll also benefit because good roads and bridges, educated workers, public police and fire departments, and a society where people are generally happy so that they don't have to riot all the time, that generally works well for everybody. But wealthy people don't like the income tax because they think it punishes rich folks. So there's been an idea around for years from some Republicans to replace our income tax with a nationwide sales tax. And it was actually introduced as a bill in Congress in 2023. But it hasn't gotten a ton of support because let's face it, no politician wants to be on record voting to have this massive tax increase that's going to raise prices. Here's the thing with tariffs. It is a nationwide sales tax that Congress doesn't have to pass, therefore vote for. And if it's enforced, it'll bring the federal government some more money because you'll be paying more for stuff. That combined with all the cuts Elon is making to Social Security, veteran services, all that, it's a strategy for a big tax cut targeted at the wealthiest Americans. A recent analysis showed that this tax cut, combined with all the programs being cut and the tariff taxes, would help those top 20% of American incomes a lot, with most of the benefit actually going to the top 1%, but it would cost everyone else more. Trump, for years, has talked about the late 1800s as being awesome for America. High tariffs, no income tax, but no Social Security, Medicare, highways, GI Bill, cancer research, whatever. It was a great time to be really rich, but kind of sucked for everybody else. In closing, I was writing this up in a coffee shop, and a friend of mine with a home construction and remodel business asked me what I was doing. When I told him and I asked him if tariffs were going to affect him with the stuff he needs to buy for his business, he only had three words: dude, or fucked. So when you try to buy a house, buy some coffee, or want that new gaming system for Call of Duty in the next year, remember when you're paying more, why that is. Thank you all very much for watching this. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, Please comment on any of the social media platforms you find this on, or you can email me at whatthebleepdoesthismean at gmail.com. That's whatthebleepdoesthismean at gmail.com. Thanks again, everybody. Good luck. Keep your heads up out there.